I was 52 years old, attending my daughter's wedding, when my son-in-law's mother said there was no place for someone who smelled like a farm. I simply replied, "Is that so?" and left immediately. Then the phone calls started pouring in. Part 1. The beginning. My name is Sarah Anderson. I'm well into my years now, just your average middle-aged woman with weathered hands and a heart full of memories. Our family has owned this farm for generations. It's soil rich with both nutrients and stories. I don't know exactly when it started, but my mother told me we've been farming this land since before I was born, before she was born even. Growing up surrounded by rows of vegetables and the earthly scent of fresh soil, I naturally took over the family farm without questioning it. It wasn't just a business, it was our legacy, our way of life. We were blessed with wonderful neighbors who became more like family over the years, and countless helping hands that made the heavy work feel lighter. During my college years at Heritage Agricultural University, I fell in love with a classmate named James. He had kind eyes and gentle hands that weren't afraid of hard work. After graduation, we got married, and to my surprise and joy, he had no qualms about taking my family name. "It's the 21st century," he said, with that warm smile that made me fall in love with him all over again. "Who cares about traditional naming conventions? What matters is that I love you." Those words still ring in my ears today, clear as the morning dew on our crops. He said it was the modern age, but back then, a man taking his wife's name was still considered embarrassing by society's standards. Still, I'm eternally grateful that he chose to be with me despite that. Then we had our first child together, just 6 months after our wedding. A beautiful baby girl with eyes that seemed to hold all the wonder in the world. I still remember the first time I held her, so tiny and precious in my arms. "Oh, look at you," James cooed, his voice filled with wonder. "You look just like your mama. So precious." I felt my cheeks flush with warmth. "Stop it, you're embarrassing me." "But it's true." He gently stroked our daughter's cheek with his finger. "Her eyes are exactly like yours. She's so adorable." My husband was completely smitten with our daughter from the very first moment. She had my eyes, yes, but her mouth and nose were just like her father's. She was perfect in every way. "What should we name her?" I asked softly, watching as she wrapped her tiny hand around James' finger. "How about the name we talked about before?" His voice was gentle, filled with hope. "Yes," I whispered, tears of joy threatening to spill. The name we had discussed before our daughter was born, hoping she would always be loved by everyone. We named her Emily. Emily grew up healthy and strong, her laughter echoing across our fields like birdsong. Though we lived far from the entertainment centers where most modern kids played, surrounded mostly by farmland, Emily never once complained. If anything, she loved playing in the soil from an early age and would come with me to the fields to help grow vegetables. "Mama, look!" she would exclaim, holding up a freshly pulled carrot with dirt still clinging to its orange skin. "I grew this all by myself." I remember how James would pick her up and spin her around, both of them laughing under the warm summer sun. "That's my girl," he'd say proudly. "A natural farmer, just like your mama." More than 10 years passed with Emily and my husband, each day bringing new joys and small adventures. Emily entered middle school, and my husband and I couldn't help but smile as we watched our more grown-up Emily adjust her uniform in front of the mirror on her first day. "She's really growing up," I said softly, leaning against James's shoulder as we watched from the doorway. "She sure is," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "She's gotten so big. And to think, our tiny Emily is already in middle school." James pretended to tear up, though I could see real emotion behind his playful act. I couldn't help but laugh at his dramatic display. "You're acting like a grandpa." "Hey!" He puffed up his chest in mock indignation. "I'm clearly a proper father. I'm kind of looking forward to her rebellious phase." "Emily's such a good kid," I mused, watching as she practiced introducing herself in the mirror. "Wonder if she'll ever even have one." "Of course she will," James insisted. Then his face fell slightly. "Oh, but what if she says she doesn't want her laundry mixed with mine anymore?" I tried to suppress my laughter. "Well, she is a girl." "Ugh." He slumped dramatically. Maybe I don't want her to have a rebellious phase after all. We continued hoping for our daughter's growth, cherishing each moment together. My doting husband, my always smiling Emily. Everything was going perfectly. Until that day. A few days later. The house phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful afternoon silence. I was startled when I looked at the landline. Nobody used it anymore except for telemarketers. Ring, ring, ring. Everyone, my daughter, my husband, all our relatives had cell phones. If there was anything important, they would call my cell phone. It must be some kind of solicitation. I should ignore it, I thought to myself. I don't want to get pressured into buying something. The phone kept ringing throughout the house, but I didn't answer. I'd once almost gotten talked into buying something I didn't need, so I had learned my lesson. I'm not very good at saying no, so there was always a chance I might get talked into something again. But the ringing wouldn't stop. It just kept going and going, each ring more insistent than the last. I anxiously stared at the phone, my heart starting to race without really knowing why. Ring, ring, click. Finally stopped, I thought with relief. But then, ring, ring, ring. Ugh! I couldn't help but crowd as the phone started up again. The same persistent ringing, like it knew something I didn't. Getting worried, I reached for the phone with trembling fingers. I had a bad feeling about this, a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't explain. Hello? I answered hesitantly. Hello, is this Mrs. Anderson? A stranger's loud voice reached my ears. Yes? How did they know my name? That question was quickly answered by their next words. Words that would change everything. Please come to County General Hospital immediately. I barely remember anything from that phone call or the frantic drive to the hospital. I just remember running and running through sterile white hallways only to arrive and find my husband already cold. They said he was hit by a truck driven by a sleep-deprived driver. Just like that, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Emily was still in middle school. We had just been talking about her rebellious phase that morning, and now, my husband was gone. But I still had Emily. I couldn't afford to wallow in despair, no matter how much my heart ached. I needed money to send Emily to college, and the vegetables wouldn't tend themselves. I threw myself into work, staying busy from sunrise to sunset. It helped me avoid thinking about my husband, about the empty space in our bed, about how quiet the house had become. But as a result, I barely saw Emily's face. Days blurred together in a haze of work and grief, until one day, about a month after we lost James, Emily's voice broke through my fog. Mom? I looked up from the pile of invoices I'd been staring at without really seeing. Emily stood in the doorway of our kitchen, backlit by the afternoon sun. It felt like the first time I'd properly seen her face in weeks, and the sight almost took my breath away. She looked so much like her father in that moment, the same determined set to her jaw, the same gentle strength in her eyes. Emily? What is it? I asked, suddenly aware of how long it had been since we really talked. Somehow, I trailed off, taking in her serious expression. This was the first time I'd really looked at her face since her father died. She looked so different from the child who had been sobbing at the funeral, more grown up somehow, as if grief had aged her overnight. Mom, we need to talk, she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. It's about my future plans. Oh, is it that time already? I felt a stab of guilt. I hadn't been able to listen properly. I'd been too wrapped up in my own grief and worry. I'm sorry, I haven't been very present lately. We have money saved up, so you can do whatever you want. I'll support you. I tried to smile at Emily, but something in her expression told me it didn't look quite right. She gave me a sad look, but it quickly changed to something more determined. Mom, please sit down, she said, pulling out a kitchen chair. Sorry to bother you when you're tired, but I need you to hear me out. Oh, I'm always here to listen, I said, settling into the chair. What is it? Emily's serious expression made my heart race as she sat down across from me. She placed her hands flat on the table, a gesture so like her father that it made my throat tight. Well, I've decided on a high school and college, she said, meeting my eyes directly. You've already decided? Where? Heritage Agricultural University. What? The words caught me off guard. The university name that came from Emily's mouth was an agricultural school, the same one where her father and I had met, had fallen in love, had dreamed of our future together. Emily, I leaned forward concerned. You don't need to think about the farm. Don't feel pressured about being an heir. These days, daughters don't have to inherit family businesses. You should do what you want. Emily shook her head before I could finish, her eyes bright with determination. I want to make my passion my career, she said firmly, and that passion is farming. Emily. I've thought about it seriously many times, she continued, her words coming faster now, as if she'd been holding them in for weeks. I always thought you and Dad were amazing as I grew up, and more than anything, I love working with the earth. I want to go to school and learn about more than just vegetables, like flowers and business management. Those skills could be useful even outside of farming. Emily pulled out some papers and spread them on the table between us. There were photos of our alma mater, the same brick buildings where I'd first met James, the same rolling green lawns where we'd studied together. They were admission materials for the school, and I could see notes in Emily's neat handwriting in the margins. I see, I whispered, unable to say more. A little. No, I was jumping for joy happy inside. To have your child want to follow the same career path, to see her eyes light up talking about the same things that had always brought me joy, it was more than I could have hoped for. Looking down to hold back tears, I nodded. Mom will support you. I'll support you with everything I have. Mom! Emily's face lit up. Thank you. From that day on, whether because I had found some peace of mind or because Emily's determination had given me strength, I was able to really see my daughter again. And I came to know aspects of Emily I hadn't noticed before, or perhaps had taken for granted. Emily was just as hardworking as her father had been, maybe even more so. She studied desperately every day, determined not to be a burden. Her desk light would still be on when I came in from the evening chores, textbooks spread around her as she prepared for entrance exams. One night, as I brought her a cup of tea, I caught sight of her study schedule pinned to the wall. Every hour was meticulously planned, from dawn till well past midnight. She'd even scheduled in time to help with the farm work. Emily, I said softly, setting down the tea, you don't need to push yourself so hard. She looked up from her books, dark circles under her eyes, but a smile still on her face. I'm not pushing myself, Mom. I just want to make you and Dad proud. Her words caught in my heart. We're already proud of you, sweetheart. Your father always was, and I couldn't be prouder. She got into high school on a merit scholarship, her acceptance letter arriving on a crisp spring morning. I found her in the field when the mail came, helping to plant the season's first seedlings. Emily, I called out, waving the envelope. It's here. She ran over, her boots leaving muddy tracks across the soil, and we opened it together with trembling fingers. When we saw the word congratulations, we both burst into tears, hugging each other right there in the middle of the field. Throughout high school, she maintained top grades while still helping on the farm and secured another merit scholarship for college. I watched her grow more confident, more determined with each passing year. She was becoming her own person, but I could still see echoes of James in her smile, in the way she approached challenges head-on. Then, 6 months before graduation, she landed a job at a major food service company. She burst into the house one afternoon, her face flushed with excitement. Mom! Mom! She called out, finding me in the kitchen. I got it! I got the job! That's wonderful, sweetheart. I pulled her into a hug. Tell me all about it. She pulled back, her eyes shining. I want to share the appeal of farming with more people, she explained, gesturing animatedly. If we can increase America's food self-sufficiency, it's a win-win for farmers and everyone else. The company has this amazing program for sustainable agriculture, and they want me to help develop it. Her enthusiasm reminded me so much of James when he used to talk about improving our farming methods. She had inherited not just his determination, but his vision for making things better. And so, I managed to watch over Emily until she turned 20, then 25, and now 28. Each milestone was a mixture of joy and bittersweet remembrance, knowing James wasn't there to see her grow. One quiet Sunday morning, I visited my husband's grave, bringing his favorite sunflowers. The granite headstone was cool under my fingers as I traced his name. Dear, I whispered, arranging the flowers. Our daughter has grown up wonderfully. At first, there had been only sadness in these visits, but now I looked forward to telling him about Emily's growth, imagining his proud smile. As I placed the flowers and stroked his gravestone, I actually had one more big announcement for him. Dear, actually, Emily brought a boy home. The memory of that day brought a smile to my face. Emily had come home looking nervous but happy, a tall young man in a crisp suit beside her. Her cheeks were flushed pink as she made the introduction. Mom, I might be getting married, she said, fidgeting with her sleeve. What do you mean, might? I couldn't help but exclaim, feeling a surge of joy and surprise. As I heard more, I learned they had met at work. The young man was so nervous he moved stiffly as he bowed his head to me, reminding me of James when he first met my parents. My name is Thomas Richardson, he said, his voice cracking slightly with nerves. Mrs. Anderson. Yes, I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. I promise to make your daughter very happy. Please, give me your blessing. Hearing Thomas's earnest words, I suddenly started crying. It reminded me so powerfully of when I got married to James, of his own nervous proposal to my parents. I never imagined I'd be on the parents' side of this conversation. Mom, why are you crying? Emily exclaimed, patting my shoulder. It's too early to cry. Sorry, I'm just so happy. I wiped my eyes, laughing at myself. Come, sit down, both of you. Let's talk properly. Over cups of steaming tea, we talked for hours. As it turned out, Thomas was the son of the CEO of the food service company where Emily worked. When I first heard he was the CEO's son, my stomach clenched with worry. I'd seen enough TV dramas about rich families disapproving of common marriages. But as Thomas spoke, his genuine warmth and consideration shone through. I actually didn't know Emily was Mrs. Anderson's daughter at first, Thomas explained, his initial nervousness giving way to animation. She never used her family connection to get ahead. I was assigned to work with her on the Sustainable Agriculture Project, and I was amazed by her knowledge and passion. Emily blushed. Thomas, you don't need to tell Mom everything. But it's true. He turned to me earnestly. Mrs. Anderson, Emily has revolutionized our approach to working with farmers. She understands both sides, the corporate perspective and the farmer's needs. She's incredible. Watching them together, I could see how they balanced each other. Where Emily was practical and down to earth, Thomas brought enthusiasm and big ideas. They reminded me of James and myself at their age. I can tell, I said softly, that Emily trusts you. Thomas's face lit up at my words. I could trust him with Emily's happiness, that much was clear. Thomas? Yes? He sat up straighter, tension returning to his shoulders. Please take good care of Emily. His eyes welled up with tears. Of course. Absolutely. I'll cherish her for life. Everything moved along smoothly after that, and we scheduled meetings between the families. The day for the first meeting arrived sooner than I expected. I had just finished my morning chores and was about to get ready when my phone rang. Oh? I checked the caller ID. It was one of our longtime buyers. Mrs. Anderson, a strained voice came through the phone. We have an emergency. We suddenly need vegetables urgently. Could you possibly help us? The voice belonged to Mr. Jenkins, who ran a local restaurant we'd been supplying for over a decade. He explained that they had tried calling everyone else but were turned down because it was too sudden. I looked at the clock on the wall, doing quick mental calculations. If I prepared the shipment now and asked the shipping company for immediate delivery, I might be about 10 minutes late to the meeting. The sensible thing would be to say no. This was an important family meeting after all. But Mr. Jenkins had stuck with us through tough times, even when bigger suppliers tried to undercut our prices. There was real desperation in his voice. All right, I said firmly. I'll deliver right away. Really? Oh, thank goodness. Thank you so much. I hung up and rushed to work, my fingers flying as I dialed Emily's number. Emily, I'm sorry, I said as soon as she picked up. I might be a little late. Some urgent work came up. That's okay. Emily's cheerful voice came through. You talked about this with Thomas, right? About how farmers work with living things, so sometimes timing can be tricky. He understands. I'm sorry, I'll come as soon as I'm done. Okay, be careful. I ended the call and threw myself into the work, moving as quickly and safely as I could. The vegetables needed to be properly sorted and packed, Rushing too much could damage them. Soon, the shipping company's truck arrived, and I helped load everything carefully. When the work was finally done, I caught my breath and checked the time. I might actually make it on time. I quickly changed clothes, making sure to use extra deodorant to cover any lingering farm smell, and caught a taxi to the restaurant where we had reservations. The restaurant's elegant glass doors chimed softly as I entered, slightly out of breath. I straightened my clothes and looked around for Emily. "Mom, over here!" Emily's voice called out. She was waving by the door of a private room, looking radiant in a pale blue dress. "I'm so sorry if I'm late." I hurried over, relieved to see her smile. "You're right on time," she assured me, giving my arm a squeeze before leading me into the private room. Thomas and his parents were already there, and my steps faltered slightly as I took them in. Thomas was wearing his usual impeccable suit, but his parents were something else entirely. His mother, Victoria, wore what I was certain was a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly income. His father cut an imposing figure in a perfectly tailored suit, his silver hair adding to his distinguished appearance. "Not at all late," Thomas's father said warmly, rising to pull out a chair for me. "Please, have a seat here." "Thank you very much," I murmured, bowing my head as I sat down. And that's when I caught it, a flash of disgust crossing Victoria's face. She wrinkled her nose and scowled, the expression gone so quickly I almost thought I imagined it. Must be my imagination, I thought to myself, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. When I looked at Thomas and his father again, they were smiling kindly, seemingly oblivious to Victoria's reaction. "Thank you for making time to meet with us today," Thomas's father said warmly. "Please help yourself to the food. The chef here is quite renowned." "Ah, thank you," I replied, trying to push aside my unease. "And I'm sorry about my urgent work earlier." "We heard from my son," he chuckled. "Farmers are amazing, aren't they? The dedication to your craft, working with nature itself." Thomas's father chatted with me casually, matching his conversation pace to mine, just like Thomas did. He asked thoughtful questions about farming, showing genuine interest in understanding our work. Meanwhile, Victoria hadn't said a word, her silence growing heavier by the minute. The appetizers arrived. Delicate arrangements of vegetables I recognized from farms like mine, transformed into artistic presentations. As we began to eat, Thomas's father steered the conversation toward wedding plans. "Now, about the wedding," he began. The moment wedding plans came up, Victoria's expression changed dramatically. She turned to glare at me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her water glass. "We'll cover all the expenses," she announced abruptly, her voice sharp and cold. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." I started to protest, but she cut me off. "In exchange, please don't interfere." "What?" I blinked, confused by her tone. Well? "Really?" Victoria sighed theatrically. "There were so many better options. Why did it have to be a farmer's daughter?" "Hey!" Thomas's father's voice carried a warning. "Victoria!" But she continued, her elegant features twisted into a sneer as she looked me up and down judgmentally. "You're just after our money, aren't you? That must be it." I felt the blood drain from my face. My daughter isn't marrying Thomas for money. I stood up involuntarily, my voice rising with emotion. Emily wasn't with Thomas for his money. How dare she suggest such a thing? Emily, who had worked so hard her entire life, who had earned everything through her own merit. "My!" Victoria's hand flew to her throat in mock offense. "How uncivilized! Please don't shout. And the manure smell is awful. I already had no appetite, but now you're standing up and making it worse." I felt my face burn with humiliation as I quietly sat back down. I had changed clothes, but I had come right after working. I couldn't argue about the smell. "Really?" Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "A farmer's daughter brings nothing but disadvantages. How dare you even think about a marriage when there's such a class difference?" "Mother!" Thomas stood up so suddenly his chair scraped against the floor. "Stop speaking badly about Emily. I've told you we're not together because of advantages or disadvantages." "What are you saying?" Victoria's voice rose with indignation. "You're going to inherit the company. Ugh, there were so many more suitable girls." "Emily is plenty kind and wonderful," Thomas insisted, his face flushed with anger. "Kind?" Victoria laughed coldly. "There are plenty of kind girls out there, even looks-wise. Surely there were better options." "Emily is beautiful." She might look nice, but that farm smell is embedded in her, isn't it? Victoria turned her cruel gaze to Emily. After all, Emily, you loved playing in the dirt since you were little, right? Your nails and hands are all rough. I wish you'd take better care of your appearance. What? I started to stand again, my fury building in my chest. But I felt a tug on my clothes. Looking down, I saw Emily had grabbed the hem of my blouse, keeping me in my seat. Her face was pale but composed as she looked directly at Victoria. Thank you for the meeting today, Emily said, her voice steady despite everything. We'll be taking our leave now. Emily bowed formally, then gently pulled me toward the exit. I let her lead me out of the restaurant, my mind spinning with shock and anger. Let's go home, Mom, Emily whispered once we were outside. I nodded mutely, still processing what had just happened. We caught a taxi and rode home together in silence. As the city lights blurred past the window, I started panicking more and more. What if the marriage is called off? I thought frantically. Did I ruin Emily's marriage? It's all my fault for smelling like the farm. Emily, I said aloud, my voice shaking. I'm sorry. Your mother. Geez, Mom. Emily's sharp tone cut through my spiral of self-blame. Her voice wasn't the sad one from earlier. It was clear and bright, filled with her usual spirit. You don't have anything to apologize for, she continued, her cheeks puffed out in anger like when she was a child. Really? She said such terrible things. What an awful person. Despite everything, I found myself laughing softly at her expression. You're right, I was quite shocked. Right? Emily threw her hands up in exasperation. Who says things like that to someone's face? I can't believe she'd be so rude. I'm going to tell Thomas I was completely surprised. Emily pulled out her phone to contact Thomas, her fingers flying over the keys. Her normal behavior, her righteous indignation on my behalf, made the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. Mom, since this happened, Emily said thoughtfully, looking up from her phone, let's just let them pay for the wedding like she said. But, I protested, we could pay half. No. Emily shook her head firmly. She seemed to have strong opinions about the wedding anyway, and I want to focus on work too, so let's leave it to them. It's your wedding, Emily, I reminded her gently. You can't leave everything to them. Ugh. Emily slumped in her seat. Okay, I'll only leave a little bit to them. That's right. That's what you should do. I reached over to pat her hand. But tell me if you need anything. Mom wants to do something for Emily too. I'd be sad if you didn't let me help. Emily's face brightened. Oh, then Mom, can you prepare the flowers? You mean the bouquet? Yes, and maybe some arrangements for the tables too. Nobody knows flowers like you do, Mom. Of course I can, I said, feeling warmth spread through my chest at her enthusiasm. Really? Yay! Emily clapped her hands together, then suddenly grew serious. Mom, you know what Thomas did today? What? He stood up to his own mother for me. Emily's voice was soft, full of wonder. He's never done that before. He told me once that everyone in his family is always so proper, so controlled. But today, he got angry for me. Looking at Emily's face, seeing the love and pride there, I decided to let go of my worry. If Emily wasn't concerned about Victoria's behavior, there was no point in me brooding over it. More than anything, Thomas had proven himself today. He had stood up to his own mother to defend Emily. He would protect my daughter. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Despite Victoria's insistence on handling everything, Emily made sure to include me in all the important decisions. We spent weekends looking at venues, tasting cakes, and most importantly, planning the flowers. I threw myself into growing the perfect blooms for Emily's bouquet. Every morning, I would check on the special patch of flowers I'd planted just for her wedding. Roses in soft pink and white, delicate baby's breath, and Emily's favorites, sweet peas. James had always said our daughter was as delicate as a sweet pea blossom, but as strong as the vines they grew on. Finally, the wedding day arrived. Clutching my invitation, I headed to the venue early, my car filled with freshly cut flowers. The morning air was crisp and cool, perfect for keeping the blooms fresh. The venue was even grander than I'd imagined, a beautiful historic building with stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the marble floors. I was directed to the preparation room where Emily was getting ready. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. Oh, Mom! Emily turned from the mirror and I froze in the doorway. She was a vision in white, the dress's delicate frills catching the light like morning dew. Her dark hair was elegantly arranged with pearl pins that had been mine on my wedding day. But it was her smile, radiant and pure, that brought tears to my eyes. "You've grown," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Grown up so beautifully." Words failed me completely. Seeing my beautiful Emily, tears started flowing freely down my cheeks. I hadn't cried this much since James passed away. Back then, I had been lost in despair, but my daughter had stayed with me, had grown strong and beautiful, despite everything. Now here she was, about to start her own family, and I was overwhelmed with emotion.